Andy, back again.
Back again.
You either have a lot to say or you owe somebody a favor here.
Yeah, sorry guys, this is the part of the show where you listen to my verbosity because it knows no limit. You put a quarter in the jukebox, you got to listen to the whole song.
Fair enough. All right. So listen, we'll get to Poppi, of course. First of all, on that last comment too, Canadian here, and Pop is the...
Yeah, after the Super Bowl last year, where we said soda 17 times in 1 minute, we got a ton of influx of comments about it being called Pop. And so we actually made a TikTok with our founder where we rolled the commercial and then he substituted the word in Pop every time. So yeah.
You're speaking to me.
We tried to make sure that the Great White North was included.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. So, I mean, you've had an incredible journey through different parts of CPG, right? Laird Superfood, Yasso, One Brands, and then now at Poppi. This is, as we've kind of heard a lot of yesterday and today, this isn't an easy space to be in. Marketing, you could probably find a lot simpler things to do. So what drove you to this space, and what kind of keeps you going into it?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a recovering Diet Coke addict. I'm sure there's, based on that laughter, I'm sure there's others in the room that's in that. So one, I was active, I love the space. I think soda is great. I think it's such a powerful or just like broad use beverage, but it isn't great for you, right? I love soda, I hate the guilt, right? That's the universal truth for a lot of people. And then I've been operating in better for you brands, disruptor brands for some time. And this was a category, I mean, as we just heard, a $65 billion space, just a few decades ago, trending its way there. And yet it's still $40 billion worth of consumption that's happening. And so this was just ripe for disruption. There hasn't really been disruption in the soda category since 1982 with the invention of Diet Coke. So you're talking about almost 45 years ago, that disruption hadn't taken place. So as someone who's been operating, whether that was protein bars or frozen snacks or supplements as from a disruption, like no better space than to potentially disrupt soda.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, we've heard a lot also about how many things a CMO is now responsible for that maybe they weren't before. What are the parts of that you're really most passionate about?
Yeah, I think when we were talking before this and kind of looked through all the great panels, I mean, like there's incredible brands, not just today, but every day, at the summit here. But I was like kind of surprised as I went through it that there's so many great things about MarTech and storytelling and AI and content and creative. There wasn't a lot there about organizational development. And when you're scaling and disrupting something at the rate that Poppi is growing at, like the organizational side of this is really hard, right? And so building teams that are built to move through rapid succession of life stages, as well as building platforms underneath that to help them do their jobs, I think is wildly underrated. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the incredible team that I work with and get to work for every single day. And to me, one of the maybe perhaps undervalued components of disruption, it is like I try to fundamentally recruit people where personal passion meets professional ambition. Like that collision or that intersection is so wildly powerful because when their personal passion is there, the consumer centricity that my entire team has around our core audience is effortless, which means now the maximization of their technical skill can really shine. And so I think there's a lot of stuff like we talk about what are all the different things in the piece of the mix to do, but like finding the right people is such an underrated piece of the puzzle, particularly when it's hard work, right? You're changing things just to maybe perhaps dimensionalize that from a Poppi standpoint. In 2024, we went from 12 to 40 people. We went from, we increased our budgets by 100%. We went from our first TV ad to the Super Bowl in 12 weeks. Like we're fundamentally rewriting the entirety of our mix at every turn. We went from selling not a lot at Walmart to being the fastest growing beverage at Walmart, period, regardless of category. And so when you're moving so rapidly through that extension, like people is really hard. They burn out. They get tired. You're constantly saying, hey, we're going to move this mix. And then the next week you're like, nope, never mind. It's this one. And so guiding people through that's why I think the recruiting path is really helpful.
So in terms of building the team, let's stick on that for a minute. What's an easy thing to overlook when you're building a team?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of like take a sidestep on that around, what are things that are undervalued that maybe you can do with team and a creative. One, have to be creative, right? I think that's like a paramount truth. One of our core values at Poppi is we are creators, and that is about echoing that sentiment all the way from our founders and our CEO and our executive team, all the way down through every single employee. In fact, we will stop meetings full out if someone has a creative idea, and we'll build on it. Even if it disrupts the flow of the meeting, in order to make that, because I don't know, for a lot of us that are creative, perhaps, like when it hits, right? And so what we make sure we fundamentally do is allow that to breathe, right? And when you allow that to breathe, you're creating an open forum for creativity to happen at a much faster and a much more reticent level for the employee base. The other one that we do is like we make sure that every single employee understands the value that they create individually relative to the larger goal. And that's just like through day-to-day, making sure people have the chance to celebrate. We're a hybrid work environment. For the company, there's only about 10% of us that work in our headquarters here in Austin. And so it's really finding ways to create forums that they can celebrate their work and shine to other parts of the organization what they're doing.
What I hear is creating space, like psychological safety around ideas and creativity and risk-taking, right?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, like we sit down once a month from a marketing leadership perspective, and we will completely rewrite our year every single month. How many like marketers in the room? Okay, again, interactive portion of the session today. For those marketers that are in the room, how many of you are like, all right, we got a great plan on like December 31st? How many of you can honestly say on December 31st, the next year when you look back, that's exactly what you executed? Any hands? I have yet, in 20 plus years of doing this, have written a plan and on 12/31 that is executed exactly like that. So rather than trying to fight the paradigm of change, we embrace the paradigm of change because opportunity comes to us all the time. We pride ourselves on being culture's favorite soda. Culture's always a moving target. And so if we're not open to change, we won't be able to ride the wave of that momentum. So we replan our year once a month. And that takes a special kind of person to be okay with that paradigm. Because for a lot of people, that means like I get a lot of whiplash. I start, I stop, and it can be frustrating, but we recruit to that and are very transparent about it.
Well, so much of how the environments, the atmosphere, the expectations that are set around our teams come down to those rituals and those choruses that we kind of repeat over to them, right? And there's this great concept that I'm a big fan of called imagined orders, right? And so if anybody's read Sapiens, anyone read Sapiens, the book Sapiens? The rest of you should go read it because it's incredible and it teaches you a lot about us as a species. And one of the things it talks about, right, is...
It's got a link for a 10%.
Yeah, I got affiliate marketing happening live right here. Yeah. Anyway, it's these imagined orders are things that shape culture. They dictate how we behave. They're not natural laws. Why do we all stop at a red light? We've agreed to, right? And so can you just talk about how you kind of create those imagined orders around the right types of behaviors in your group?
Yeah, so you and I talked about this a little bit, and you kind of heard some of it in some of the prior panels earlier with, some of the challenge that larger companies go through is like they fall into traps, right? They fall into traps where it's like, well, we did this and therefore we'll do that, right? And that's one of the things that I've kind of run to in my career is being a part of things where you don't have the imagined orders. You don't have those things that are locked into that. And I think for us, that means one, we have to enable people to be able to have the conversation on what should be, not what has been. And so that's why that planning, that rhythmic planning cycle, and I call it planning, I wish it was that formal and fluid, but it's about giving them the safety and the permission to just present things. So for example, last year we launched our college program at Poppi from scratch. Within 3 months, we had 5 people running a program across 1,000 schools, sampling, we sampled last year like 3.4 million cans or something like that to college students. That entirety of that program was built and grown by our employees, dedicated with a simple mission of encouragement to go get that. And so one of the things that I do personally is that every person that comes into my organization, I sit down and meet with them. I walk through expectations, how I operate, what's going to be expected of them. And then I have the same kind of chorus line to them around my job is to set up bumper lanes, right? Like I think of myself as a bumper lane. I don't throw the ball. I don't choose the ball that's going to get thrown. I don't target down. But my job is to make sure that no matter what, that teammate or that leader is throwing strikes all the time. And that's a shift in mentality. There's a control paradigm that has to be let go with that. So it starts literally from day one when you enter my organization. And then it's a constant, what would you do? What would you do? Where can we be better mentality?
It's almost like seeing how far the ripples can go on their own steam, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
And then now, once it goes and they feel that, then they've embraced the ownership of that. And then it's, when you're growing, and I think I heard Karen say this earlier around like, it is a high volume of work. And I know we're all super busy. I think that's the landscape of marketing today, is there's so much that is happening. As a team, you can't be everywhere. It's impossible, right? We create something like 10,000 pieces of content on an annualized basis. There's no way that I could see every single one of those pieces. It's just impossible. It would run my day and we'd never get to the next piece of the mix and the next audience to continue to grow the brand. And so you have to figure out ways to allow your employees to be comfortable with building wrong, and quickly correcting that and continuing to move forward.
Yeah. So getting to Poppi, I mean, it's obviously the story is a founder story, right? Husband and wife, starts out at the farmer's market into Whole Foods and so on, and then it grows from there. What is the environment like relative to that founder DNA, today?
Yeah, I mean, our founders are still very actively involved. So Allison and Stephen Ellsworth, who live here in Austin, are still very much involved in the business. Stephen runs our operations business, so our product development and supply chain. Allison runs the creative team, and it is they are very actively involved. And that founder story and the DNA of that is still very much a part of who we are, the kind of American dream. And we are Shark Tank brand. For those that may not know, like we went on Shark Tank as a brand called Mother Beverage. Allison had some autoimmune issues, couldn't quite figure it out, found ACV, made a cocktail out of it, went on Shark Tank, found an investor who's still our most active investor today, and was like, I love the product, I hate your brand. And came in, rebranded from Mother Beverage into Poppi. That launched on March 7th of 2020. So for folks that are historians, you can do the math of where you may have been at that moment. And we luckily had a reunion event on Shark Tank in April of that year. That was like, where are they now? That went on air, and overnight we became the number one selling soda on Amazon. So there's in these disruption brands, maybe this is a nice little like sidebar. There's a moment in a lot of these disruptive brands that is an unexpected earned moment that you didn't anticipate. I've been on enough of them to know like each one has one. Maybe you showed up on Joe Rogan for the first time and he's like, I've tried this thing and it's great. And you're like, DTC sales shot off, right? There's a lot of different ways
that can happen. It'd be good to be lucky and lucky to be good.
Absolutely. I think, and embrace that reality for sure. So we had that moment take off. And since then, the founder story has been a big part of that. In fact, Allison's speaking at a couple events this weekend. You guys can go see her story, her perspective around how she's been involved in business, how that's evolved over time for sure. So very much a part of our DNA is that founder story. And then the content also has a ton of other components to it, but it's definitely part of who we are.
But that must be something also that your team feels as well. If the founders are still so close to the business, then that initial energy and entrepreneurial attitude must still be very present.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think that's what it creates a I hate the word authentic because I feel like it's like contrived and overused, and perhaps it's just like a human perspective and a voice, right? And particularly in a category like ours, where we're competing with very, very large, traditional and incumbent brands that don't have that. It's a wildly powerful and unique perspective. Now, we have to live that through our DNA, which we do. One of the pieces that I think one of the questions later is, I'll just hit it now, is like our dedication to organic social community management and CX. Over 1/3 of our team is dedicated to that. And we get about 800,000, actually more than that, DMs a year. We answer every single one of them. Right, we get over 1 million CX cases a year. We answer every single one of them. Right, if someone asks us for a product, we will seed. Right, so like we are dedicated to that perspective, and I think that's where a lot of companies don't follow through. Maybe the founder story makes us humans. Then we have to follow that through in our DNA, and our social media team follows that through. I talked earlier about hiring for passion. Right, like I would if I polled the room around who our core audience is, most of you guys would probably get it right, which is we're Gen Zennial female forward. 90% of our team is Gen Zennial female. Right? They understand this consumer. They're dedicated to this consumer. The vernacular they use is consistent with how that consumer talks, so that all of the fluidity of our social media is now just authentically pure, because no one's trying to get in the way to make that an incongruency along the way. And I think that's like all anchored in this founder story, because in the beginning, it is the founder. Like that's it. Right? And so it's about how do we keep that perspective going through now that we've grown and scaled to the level we are at.
Thank you. So let's switch gears for a second. So, I've had a chance to interview a lot of folks like you in different organizations. And somebody at one of your competitors once said to me, I could introduce a new flavor and maybe get a 2% bump. Yeah. But if I help the pizzerias sell more pizza, then we're going to get a bigger bump than that 2%. Yeah. And then yesterday, Ashley Edmonds at Kraft Mac and Cheese also talked about sort of having working in parallel in thinking about the consumer while also thinking about those account leaders for the different retail accounts and what they need out in market, and not sort of just thinking about winning awards with great campaigns, but tactically, what do they need? And I just wanted to bring that up because I think that that's a really interesting rub and not, something that's not talked about enough is those, how do you think about your internal customers that and both in terms of your account folks, but also in helping those retailers sell more pizzas, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I would say our retail leg was one of the latter pieces that came together. We started very socially, digitally, e-commerce based, and as that came on board and we started to get scale, then I would say uniqueness of the programming that was required came there. Thankfully, call back now to the creativity that the team has, we've been able to figure out unique and creative ways to work with those partners that have then enabled us to build faster, whether that's on a share level or just on a distribution level. I'll give a couple of examples. Target is a great example. So this year, earlier at Target, we launched a unique flavor at Target with a full line of apparel branded Poppi at Target. And in January of this year, we sold more apparel at Target than we did in January as a company 2 years ago. We're selling more apparel than we sold soda at this point, in our Target license. That all comes together because we're constantly meeting with our partners, constantly being willing to open up to new things. We have so many ideas that we're able to balance that when a customer comes up and is like, hey, I want to try this. For example, another one is...
Sorry, before I go to that, so that was something that was a kind of a fluid conversation between you and the partner.
It's a fluid conversation. So we've always done merchandise as part of our advocacy program, which we subscribe to an advocacy-based marketing model. And so apparel and merchandising was always a part of our DNA. One, our founder has a deep love for fashion, so I think that was always going to be a part of it. But it's also become something we've used experientially. It becomes walking billboards on college campuses. And so there was always this DNA of like, how can we scale this? How can we look at this? And an idea in a meeting came along. It's like, what if we had a line at Target? And then that led to a conversation with the buyer. which then led to a conversation with the merchandising arm of Target, which went into, hey, let's do a line. That process from that inception to finish was about 6 months, right? So then we had to go. We don't make merchandise. We make our own for like smaller persons, but not at this scale. So then we had to get into Target's merchandising approach. They had to give us a vendor because we're not going to forecast sizes and those. That's not our business model. But all of that starts from small inception, letting those ideas breed, and then going into a customer and having a real conversation with them.
So the willingness to, like you said, get a vendor that will help you with that, to say, the knee jerk could be, well, like, that's not the business that we're really in. That's not our core. We need to, especially as a newer brand, stay focused on.
They can only say no if I ask, right? But they could say yes, and I think that's part of that entrepreneur, founder mentality that also sits inside this business. Is like, it can't hurt to ask. Let's go have the conversation. And if that person says no, then get someone else on the phone, right? And we're going to push to do that. Breaking through into this space requires the ability to run through a few walls to get there for sure.
Love that. And I cut you off. You were going to go into another example there. Did you want to hit that? Oh, we'll keep going. Yeah. It was a lie anyway. You made it up anyway.
Yeah, probably.
So one of the things in terms of, understanding where to go next, right? You obviously have a lot of creative, talented people. There's also this, the essence of the brand through line from the founders and that energy. How do you think about, looking at adjacent categories or cousin businesses for inspiration? I interviewed someone at Bacardi. They told me a story about their flavor scientists looking at ethanol fuel production methods that eventually allowed them to create a new kind of spirit years later, but they would have never been able to find that connection if they didn't have that license to take a leap and look at those other places. Are there any things that you do, or how do you think about looking at those adjacent spaces for inspiration?
Yeah, so our category reaches a lot of adjacent needs, so it gives us freedom to think about what else can soda be in and have that kind of mental approach. The second part is we were born out of a disruption to the category, and so there's this constant, I would say, underlying mentality. Go back to that we are creators perspective of things, that we're always thinking through things. If I were to showcase what Mother Beverage was, which was a glass, very heavy ACV product, to where we are now, to we're on the heels of launching our highest energy level product. We are constantly pushing. And the reality is, in order to build a moat about what we've built, because I'm sure many of you have seen a plethora of Me Too's that are hitting the marketplace at this point in time, we have to continue to rise to yet another expectation set. That's not going to stop. Right. So for us to then be like, oh, we'll just hang out here, that's not what got us here. And quite frankly, consumer expectations are always rising, right? They're always shifting. Even our core consumers, right? Those core early adopters, the reason they're early adopters is because they want something new. So I can alienate them by never providing something new, or I can continue to have them be a part of my core and advocate on my behalf by constantly innovating and pushing the boundaries of where I want to go. And so that then leads into a scientific approach to it. That leads into an innovation and ideation approach to it. But there's a lot of things in our vault. Well, timing is important in the innovation cycle for us to launch too, but it's always there.
Yeah, I've heard innovation in some sense. There's some philosophies around it, almost thinking about it like a VC would think about deal flows and making bets constantly so that you have those rolling tests happening, right?
I think that a lot of companies we can't go there, but if you look at a switching, analysis, but then they're going to take, it's well, why can't I go there, right? If I'm going to lose business to it, then clearly the consumer's willing to make an adoption between my product and that product. I can clearly go there. And I think we overthink permission sometimes, and we think too narrowly of our brands. And I don't think consumers hold those same perspectives.
Okay, so last question from me, and then we'll see if anybody in the audience has a question. The other thing is, as you grow, you also, in today's climate, brands can become targets as well for more scrutiny, right? And whenever you're making better for you claims, then there's also that happening as well, where everybody's looking at this and analyzing this and how good is this relative to this beverage or this choice, right? So, there's that sort of when you're leading with a better for you piece, that's kind of part and parcel to what you're going to get. But how do you balance then positioning the better for you while also positioning the fun and the attitude and the sort of moment in time spontaneity of the brand as well?
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a couple of thoughts here. One is around how we think about our content and our brand proposition across the board. And while the core of the DNA of the inception of the brand was founded in gut health, we have like migrated well past that. Yes, that's a piece of it, but like we're operating in soda, which means we're operating about clean ingredients. We're operating around less sugar, and we have to have a better taste profile in order to really carve those houses over for trial. Nobody's drinking shit food. Like no one's gonna do it. Like no matter what, like as much as we think and I'm a very big health and wellness fan, but like my wife will put shit in front of me. I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna do that. Even though I know outright it's better for me, I just won't do it if it doesn't taste good. And so for us, our DNA has evolved and we've laddered in more components to make the proposition more holistically rounded. That's like saying Netflix is only gonna run Love is Blind. Right? Like that just doesn't make any sense. You would never stay in that place. And so for us, the proposition has evolved over time. I also think it's important to recognize that not every product is going to solve everything. I would imagine by nature of most people in this room, who considers themselves, again, interactive portion of the session, who considers themselves a health and wellness, kind of consumer, right? Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. How many of you have one product that you use to fulfill all of your health and wellness needs? No one, right? No one. The reality is it's a bundle of goods that make up that proposition. And I think Poppi has the opportunity to be a part of that proposition as well as fulfill a need that I love soda, but I hate the guilt. And so I think it's about balancing that, both in how we think about our content, no different than the founder story, and how we think about the marketplace.
Wonderful. I think that brings us close to our time. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Hey, how you doing?
Thank you.
I'm doing well.
Yeah. I have two questions. One, I really like your shoes, so I'm curious what brand they are.
It's Gola.
What was that?
Gola.
Gola, of course. Okay, thank you. The second question is, Karen had talked before about
Is there Poppi socks you can buy them at Target?
Yeah,
right
yeah.
now?
I already gathered that part.
That's a plant. That's a plant right there.
Karen had talked
I get a 10% cut.
Karen had talked about that, that pivot point with intuition and insight, and when you're using your intuition to lead your brand versus when you're using insights to act with your brand. I'm curious where you guys are within that journey at Poppi and what you guys are doing to make sure that all your intuition is really grounded in what the consumer needs and wants.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll use Super Bowl 2024 because that's like a monster level investment that felt overnight in the time. And I kind of mentioned earlier, we went from, in 12 weeks time, we went from the first time we ever aired a broadcast TV commercial to the Super Bowl. That didn't happen. It wasn't there was a lot of stepping stones that led into that. From there, we tested it on a DR level. Then we bought, we got a couple of DR hits on a Monday night game. Oh, look at that. Then we bought into the NFC Championship game. And then it was oh my God, this is working. But it's still a monster level gut feel to buy that level of media at that one time. But it was balanced. We had something that was building. It wasn't planned, but we had enough evidence to feel good to take that risk. And we have a pretty high level risk orientation in what we do, right? We are not scared to push the envelope. I'm sure many people in this room have already been asked a couple of times about vending machines. We are not scared to push the envelope. The system today, in order to generate attention, you have got to figure out ways to break through. Sometimes that comes back on you, but sometimes you got to take a bet. And I think that's part of that DNA that we've got that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Yeah, so it's balanced.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy, for your time. You'll be back in an hour for your third session?
Sure. Why not? I'll be here all day.
Thanks, everybody.